All right. You can all hear me okay, and I hope you can see Jess. And if you can't see James, you're really having trouble. It's the second day, folks. My name is Mike Sellers. This is James Portnow. And on video, we have Jess Tompkins. She is stuck in North Carolina until later today. She'll be here tonight, but thanks to the weather, she's joining us from the future. So we're here to talk about building bridges between academia and industry. Actually, let me start by having James introduce himself, and then Jess, you can introduce yourself, and then I'll do me, and then we can talk about some questions we have.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is James Portnow. I am a game designer by trade. I've worked on games ranging from the Call of Duty series to Farmville to League of Legends. I have spent some time trying to teach to the best of my ability this trade. It's very complicated. This man is far better at it than I am. And other than that, in my spare time, as you know, we all have, I write a show called Extra Credits, and now I guess Extra History and Extra Sci-Fi. And my pronouns are he and him.
Excellent. Jess, you want to go and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jess Tompkins. I'm a PhD candidate at Indiana University, where Mike Sellers also teaches. Mike is I'm also fortunate enough to have him on my PhD committee. And I do not work in the commercial games industry, nor have I made a commercial game, but I'm really interested in how video games affect players from a social psychological perspective. And I'm really interested in the emerging field of games user research, which is kind of like a nice connection of research and industry.
Great, thanks. So I'm Mike Sellers. I am now at Indiana University. I've been there for about 3.5 years. I've worked in the games industry for over 20 years. I actually designed my first paper RPG in 1985, as a friend reminded me recently. Started my first company in 94, published our first game in 96. It was the first 3 MMO game called Meridian 59. Worked on a ton of games since then. I was lead designer on The Sims 2. Ran Realm of the Mad God for a while, as well as a whole bunch of other games that either never made it out or you've never heard of. Holiday Village, anyone? No? Okay. See, honestly, my favorite game I've ever done, and like no one has heard of it. Anyway, but so about 15 years ago, really now, I started thinking, okay, at some point I'm going to want to start to move to academia. I love being on the industry side, but I want to help move things forward as well. And at the time, there was an immense divide. There still is an immense divide between academia and industry. So I started doing some things. I was doing some research in artificial intelligence for the Defense Department. I managed to publish some of that. I managed to do some online teaching, trying to make myself more attractive to academia, because the thing that I was getting was, well, if you don't have a PhD, you'll never teach at a university. And so through a bunch of different events and the stars aligning just right, I was able to join Indiana University and help them start or sort of reboot their games program. So we have a wonderful game design undergraduate program, a major in game design at Indiana University, and we're working on a graduate program. So I've had for a long time a really deep interest in bridging this gap between industry and academia, and I've seen it from both sides. I can feel myself becoming an academic day by day.
I feel like you should crack out your book and be like...
I also just wrote a textbook on game design. So yes, buy my book. I'm no good at plugging. Anyway, so we wanted to start off just by talking about this gap. Let me give one little bit of history, one little more bit of history. The book. Thank you, James.
I do what I can.
I will be giving a talk tomorrow night, actually an actual presentation talk that comes from the book, if you're interested in that. So I was on a blog called Terra Nova, which had a lot of academics and industry people, again, I don't know, 6-8 years ago. And one of the people on there was a guy named Ted Castronova. And he and I found we were in this argument about bridging the gap between academia and industry. And about, I don't know, a few days into it, I realized, we're actually totally agreeing with each other about there is this immense gap. How do we solve it? We really didn't know. Ted is at IU. He was one of the ones he was really the one who was instrumental in bringing me to Indiana University and really making that jump to academia, which is something that a lot of developers are looking at doing or are doing now. But so I've been looking at this for a long time. This has been an issue that we've had for a very long time. And I don't know if we have any answers today. I think we have some experiences we can discuss. So I've got some notes from Jess, actually. Jess should be leading this panel. She was the one who came up with this, but again, due to the weather, I'll be sitting in here, and she'll be on screen. But so I have a few things I want to throw out to James and Jess, and I'll talk about them a little bit too, and then we'd like to open it up to the rest of you in the audience. So let me just ask Jess and James both, what are your experiences in collaborating between academia and industry? Positive and negative, or challenging and effective, however you want to put that. James, why don't you start?
All right. So I've done a lot of work on education, not specifically academia, but working on using games to further education in general. And the problem that I found and the frustration that I found is very often there is this enormous gulf that we're talking about where you have subject matter experts, you have people who really know the thing they want to teach, and then you have people who really know how to engage, how to make a game something that you want to play. And these two people never speak, right? And so almost all the educational games you see, the reason that we think they're boring or uninteresting or why educational games get such a bad rap is simply because there's that divide. And then on the other side, when you get people on the traditional AAA entertainment games industry trying to make sort of educational things, very often they're wildly inaccurate or off the mark because, again, they don't speak to the people that they need to. And so to me, that's probably been the biggest frustration I've seen. There is a project I can't really talk about where they reached out to, I can't name the project specifically, but they reached out to university for economists and statisticians to help sort of understand what was going on with their in-game economy, and it actually was amazing. It totally changed both their thinking about how to run it and fix the majority, introduce some new ones, but fix the majority of the problems that they had with their economy, because really running a sort of a live game with a lot of people, it is very similar to the real world in a lot of ways. And then they could take all that they learned and do some small refinements to make it more engaging.
So, Jess, I want to hear from you, but let me just follow up with James for a second, and then Jess, I'd like to address this too. Why is that so rare? I mean, I know a couple stories like that myself, and I can't name them either, but why is it so rare?
I think it's actually because if you look, so I go to a lot of educational conferences, I go to a lot of industry conferences. I never see the same people at those two conferences. We need to find some way to bring us all together so we know who to call. I literally think it's that a lot of times a game company doesn't think of it because it's not in their consciousness, and when they do, they don't have a business card of somebody to reach out to, or somebody they can get on the phone and say, hey, it was cool hanging out with you at this thing. I know you're an expert on this, want to collaborate?
That's a really interesting point. So I've gone to a lot of industry conferences and not nearly as many. I don't know what we call
Symposia?
this. No. What do we call this? This is a.
This is a festival.
The festival. Yes.
Festival.
I mean, honestly, from my industry side, the way we would say this is a consumer-facing conference.
So
That's so horrible to say.
So this is a community conference.
Community. There you go.
PAX is a consumer-facing conference. This is about love of the media.
Very, very good. But it's great. It's great to see James here and have Jess here, because they're the only two people that I've seen here who I also see at some of the industry conferences. So there is this immense divide. So Jess, let me go on to you, and then I'll fill in a couple things of my own thoughts.
Sure. I have been both academic industry conferences. The Game Developers Conference is the main industry conference. But at the academic conferences for game scholars, is there an issue with the audio?
Yeah, you're cutting in and out.
Oh.
You were fine a moment ago. Keep
I
talking.
thought so. All right, I'll try again. So at the academic conferences, at least in the fields of communication science, we have people who study games, and a lot of the times they're kind of speaking to each other. I'm sorry, is the audio coming in all right?
You're really cutting in and out, unfortunately. I don't know if there's something that's changed, or I'm going to turn you around for a second.
Yeah.
Solved. Yeah, exactly. As long as you look at me, you're okay. No. So I don't know. Try it again. We'll try it again and see what happens here.
Okay. I'm trying to turn up the volume on and I also have a new laptop. It's a Surface Pro. I don't know if that has something to do with it.
Your laptop, your audio quality is fine. It's just the volume, it's just cutting in and out a bit.
Okay, I'll try to get closer. So I've been to industry conferences and academic conferences. And in the academic conferences, something that I observed is that we have scholars who are kind of just talking to one another, not talking to members of the industry, not to really members of the general public, but just kind of sitting in the ivory tower, so to speak. Did that go through?
Yeah, perfectly.
Awesome. So that's just an observation I've had, and as a PhD student who's wanted to make my research relevant to people working in the industry, it's certainly been somewhat frustrating from my perspective. Now, some scholars, that's not their objective. They don't necessarily care if their research has an impact on the industry. They're more interested in whether their research is contributing to the body of scholarly knowledge. However, from my perspective, I really want my research to be relevant to the people making games and playing games.
I think on that note, actually, you're part of a new generation of scholars coming up. I think is a really hopeful sign for me, where you are interested in making your scholarship relevant to industry. There are a few others. I mean, the guys,
Absolutely.
Nick Ducheneau and Nick Yee at Quantic Foundry. If you guys don't know Quantic Foundry, you should definitely look them up. They have surveys, even just as game players, they have surveys of over 300,000 gamers now. And if you want to get a really good profile of what kind of games you like, what your motivations are for games, they have a phenomenal model. But that's one of the very few examples at any kind of large scale of academic work coming over into the industry side. From my point of view in industry, like James said, I know of a couple stories that I probably can't name the names of either, of people bringing academics in and saying, hey, we have this problem, let's look at this. Most of the stories I know did not end well, because the academics said, well, this is a really interesting problem. We think we have an understanding, but you give me, $50,000 in 2 years, and I'll come back and tell you, what's what. And I mean, that's almost a quote from a wonderful professor that I worked with for a while at EA. He had no concept of the pressures we were under. We're like, no, we need a 5-page report by Monday, and we need to know something actionable by the end of the month at the latest. And that was just completely, it went right by him. It was one of these, I really felt like at the time we were living in two different time streams, and yet on the flip side, when I was thinking about coming to IU, one of the things that Ted Castronova said to me that sort of sealed it for me, he said, this is a place where you'll have time to think. Because so often in industry, we just have no time to think. It's like, get it done. And that kind of difference in paradigm of how we operate, how long scholarship takes to bake sometimes, and yet what scholars like Jess can bring to, here's how you can understand your players better, here's how you can understand the economy better, or how they're seeing gender roles in the game more inclusively or more completely as a developer. That's really important stuff. So, again, bridging that divide is something that I think is really difficult. Let me go to something hopefully a little more positive. Jess, let me start with you this time if I can. What are some of the fields that you see where we are seeing positive results? I just talked about how rare it is, and I think there are some areas where we're seeing a little bit more, where we're being able to take research and really apply it well in game design or in game development. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think at the moment, at the moment, there's a push for the big commercial AAA studios to hire researchers to understand player behavior, address issues of harassment in online games, player toxicity, or even just general usability of a game. Does playing the game make sense to the players? They hire researchers to address those questions or those issues they have in the games. But right now, it's really only the commercial AAA studios who have the means, the funds, really, to hire these individuals to do that work. Audio okay?
Yeah, it's great, actually.
Awesome. So it's part of the growing field of games user research, kind of also related to user experience research. They're overlapping in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of interesting work being done in that field. I follow a lot of people who do that kind of work on Twitter. The International Game Developers Association has a games user research special interest group that if you're a student or aspiring game developer, you can sort of find those online social communities and just discover more like what that field is about if you're interested in that particular facet of how research can be applied to game development and how it can sort of assist the development process, lead to, I think, more of an optimal experience for players in that particular game.
Jess, can you talk for a minute about what game user research is?
Yeah, so games user research, it can cover a lot of different areas. Some people look at more like big data, like just taking huge, massive data sets from a game like World of Warcraft from the players, because as players are doing stuff in those games, all kinds of variables are being recorded, like login time, which characters you have, how many characters you have, and all the quests you go on, how many enemies you kill and defeat, and so on and so forth. So all of those variables are recorded and stored somewhere on the server. And so some areas of games user research focus on the big data and what can we learn about player behavior, player retention from those big data sets. Others are more, other types of games user research is more, we've got a game in the early stages of development, and we want to make sure that we can onboard the players in a way that they're enjoying the game, right? That it's not a frustrating experience, that maybe the tutorial is teaching them the things they need to know in order to play the game. So that type of user research focuses more on playtesting, where you just might observe players in a setting where they're playing the game, or you have them play the game and they fill out a questionnaire afterwards, and then the questionnaire would ask them about the experience, maybe like, did they understand things like, what were the controls intuitive? Did they find the experience frustrating? Did they find it enjoyable? And so on and so forth. And so then the researcher could look at the data set collected from the questionnaire afterwards and then find out, okay, are there any issues that we need to address because during this particular stage of the level, the player got overwhelmed and they felt really frustrated, or they died like way more than we expected them to die in the game. So they would probably want to evaluate from that point forward if they do find there are issues. And a lot of and the great thing about that field is a lot of the theories are starting to be more psychologically informed. So there is kind of a conversation happening. People in the industry are hiring individuals with master's degrees in psychology, human factors, other related fields that deal with social science. And they're also starting to hire people with PhDs as well. So it's definitely a possible route for grad students interested in studying games.
I'm just glad we actually have PhDs now. I mean, at least PhDs that make sense. Some of us are old enough to remember when they didn't. James, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, actually, I think that most of it was just covered. I wanted to add that outside of just games, I know Twitch has brought on a bunch of academics to study toxicity and that sort of thing, which has been great.
Yeah.
I think that's super encouraging, and they're turning over huge amounts of data, which I think is valuable for toxicity in our society in general. But the thing I kind of wanted to talk about, if I can derail us a tiny bit,
Sure.
is...
That's what panels are for.
Yeah, exactly. I'm actually super passionate about impractical research, impractical academic research. For example, I want to do a sort of Jungian deconstruction of Bloodborne because I think there's a ton there. I think if we do not get academics doing that sort of thing, we do not ever get our seventh seal or anything like that, right? We don't get highly symbolic works because as a designer, I can't create highly symbolic works because there's neither expectation that the audience will understand them nor anyone who's having that discussion to allow it to filter down to the audience. And on the other side, I run into, especially unfortunately with some of the things we're talking about, with us bringing on more psychologists and with us bringing on more social scientists. As a designer, especially the more I design in multiplayer spaces, I run into into real moral quandaries, right? Like there are moral issues that we should be discussing as an industry, which is hard to discuss within industry because we are in some ways dollar driven, right? And on the other side, when it's just being done by a sort of media that hasn't actually studied these things, very often it's done as pandering to the consumer. And what we need is really people who have thought about this a great deal, wrestling with some of the huge moral issues that come up as we're building games that people are going to spend months or years of their lives on.
That's fantastic. That's so many thoughts on that. There's just a couple things that occurred to me. One is that we've known about online harassment for at least 25 years.
Yeah.
I mean, longer than that really, but in games. So, like I said, my first game was released in '96. We came up with a bunch of little aphorisms. I think Ralph Koster still has on his website in the history of video games, or history of online worlds. One of them was what we called Hankey's Law, which was named for John Hankey, who was a producer on Meridian 59, my first game, who said that in every population there's going to be a certain subset that are assholes. And he said it like 2%. John Hankey, by the way, is the guy who now runs Niantic, Pokemon Go, things like that. So he's done really well for himself. Good guy too. But that's a little bit like saying, in any population there's going to be about 2% of people who have cholera, and gee, isn't that too bad? Now what we have today is like a cholera outbreak, a cholera zombie flu outbreak. I mean, it's just everywhere. And I think part of the issue that I see there too is that, and I think is where we can have an interesting and effective bridge, is that a lot of that disease, if you want to put it in those terms, comes from the industry itself. I mean, a lot of the companies, unfortunately, at least a certain number of the companies in the industry, are not wonderful places to work in terms of toxicity and harassment and things like that. But this is one of the things I think where academia can help us say, hey, that's not okay. Here are some ways we can solve that within the company and then solve that within the games. And that takes me to what you're saying about getting the seventh seal. I'd settle for Citizen Kane, really.
I'd settle for
Casablanca,
Citizen Kane.
You
know what? I am willing to take Cabinet of Dr. Caligari at this point. So.
And I think we're slowly, haltingly getting there. But I think this is actually another interesting point, and I'd like to hear from both of you your thoughts on this one. What I see as someone who's bridged both sides of this is that a lot of what's done in academia doesn't feel relevant to the industry because it's not relevant today. So how can we create things on the scholarship side that are forward-looking, that are going to deepen our understanding of these amazing interactive things we can do that get us to the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari? And on the flip side, what are things that we can do in industry that will help drive research forward? Because there's almost nothing coming from that side of saying, hey, we have a really tough problem here, we'd like you to look at this, and yeah, if you need to come back in a year, come back in a year. That's when I honestly don't know how to bridge. I mean, I'd love to figure that out, but I'd love to have your guys' thoughts. James, what do you think?
Well, my thoughts were just some of the very specific practical issues need to be moved on immediately, but some of these larger issues, this toxicity thing that you're talking about, I mean, we've even known that it was going to be a zombie plague for at least a decade, right?
This is coming,
Right.
Yeah.
We've known that. That's the sort of thing that we could have brought in academia on in advance and given them plenty of time to do the academic thing and still been fine. Same with a lot of the moral questions we're dealing with, like, I can build a system that's very compelling to the player, but they get nothing from, right? is that something I should do as a designer, right? Do I have a moral obligation to at least return something to people for their hundreds of hours of time? And if so, how can we find a compromise where I'm still delivering what the company needs, but in a better, more wholesome way, right? That's a problem that's going to be with us until we deal with it. And so I think that at least on that side, there's a lot of things that we could do that would bring in that academia could be super helpful on at an academic pace.
So Jess, what do you think? What can we do there?
Well, I think there's a big barrier for like academics who are not working within.
Sorry, Jess, we're losing your audio again. I don't know.
Yeah. I would say that there's a bit of a barrier for academics working outside of big commercial studios, because a lot of the data on probably player toxicity is proprietary, and they're probably very hesitant to share that data with people thinking as outsiders, for a variety of very sound reasons, like the data could get leaked to a competitor or things of that nature. Mike and James, you have more experience in the industry. Can you think of any situations where like a data set or data on players has been handed over to an academic to address an issue?
Blizzard's done it a couple of times. EverQuest did it a number of years ago, but they're very, very careful. They treat that data like gold, or more than gold. And it's the kind of thing, if an academic ever lets something like that get out, that'll be the last time it happens, because there's already a lot of mistrust there. But it has happened a couple of times. But one thing that occurs to me is maybe we're looking at the wrong target. Maybe it's not the AAA companies. Maybe this is going to come out of indies and small groups, some small companies who are willing to take more risks, willing to work more with academics.
Or maybe we need to do things that are consumer facing and actually to the people who care about and play the games, and then have them demand that we implement some of these things that we've learned, that we can learn from studying the games themselves rather than the data behind the games.
So let me ask just a couple more questions, and then I'm going to open this up to the audience. We've had a couple of hands go up, and I don't want people to feel like I'm ignoring them. I guess the last couple ones. This one, what do you guys think some of the biggest misconceptions are coming from either side about the other side?
Do you want to go first?
Go ahead, Jess.
Okay. Let's see. Well, I think one of the misconceptions that the industry might have about academics who study games or video game effects is that academics don't like games. Academics think games are bad. In my experience, going to the academic conferences, all the academics there are super passionate about games. They have been playing games from an early age. They love games. They're fascinated by them. They're very often gamers themselves and highly identify with big, games like Zelda, the Zelda series, and like they will even wear like gamer related shirts to these more academic conferences. So at least in the academic communities that I've been involved with, most of the academics who study games are very passionate about them and definitely want to bring to light the pro-social effects and understanding human behavior and knowledge inside of games. So I think that's definitely, I think probably some of the research on video game violence, video game aggression, from certain scholars in the psychology community, probably have skewed this perception that academics are very, have a certain agenda when it comes to studying games, and they're game haters. They don't like video games, and they see no really benefit from them. And that's certainly not the case for the majority of academics studying games that I've encountered.
Just on that note, one thing I've seen in terms of things filtering across is not a misconception so much, but you use the words pro-social. I've actually seen a couple of games that advertise as some of their bullet points, pro-social gameplay. And seeing that phraseology come out of academia into games is, to me, is a really positive sign. But let's go back to the negative side. Let's go back to the misconceptions, James.
So mine are actually pretty simple and kind of brutal.
Oh, good.
So the misconception on the industry side is that academics are useless. The misconception on the academic side is that they do not understand, that they do not actually understand how game development works.
I've had the misfortune of being in an academic talk where someone was talking about a game that I worked on, an academic, talking about how and why we did things. And really, it was like, I mean, that was a strange experience. And they were completely wrong. I mean, and that didn't help any of my misconceptions.
Did they assume there was forethought and planning?
Yeah, of course. But they also assumed that it was all about the money. And it is, at some level, all about the money. But if you're a game developer, especially in a AAA studio, what you're trying to do is to say, yes, I know we need to make this big pot of money so we can all have salaries and keep going, but we want to try and do something fun and maybe even a little bit artistic. No, their misconceptions were much more about how we were consciously. I'm trying to think of the exact phrasing. I probably shouldn't use the exact phrasing. Someone will find it on the internet. But basically, how we are reinforcing the patriarchy as a conscious design decision.
Wow.
Yeah.
Rough.
Yeah. And the thing is, it wasn't even that we were like, no, our morals are a completely different space. We're like, no, we were trying to make these two characters go like this. You know, it was not anything at that level at all. But yeah, go ahead, Jess.
Did you have a conversation with this person after their presentation? Like, did you talk to them in some way to kind of challenge their interpretation of how you'd worked on that game?
I did. I didn't at that time know the academic tradition, which those of you who aren't academics and may not know. It's when someone is giving a talk and you give you have a question, quote unquote, that is actually a not so thinly veiled dagger into their heart. Or let me tell you why you're wrong, and here's my citations. I didn't do that. I did talk to them afterwards and ask them, so, who did you talk to on the team? Oh, well, no one. Oh, well, I was on that team. And, it was one of those discussions that I was really kind of angry when I went up and talked to them. And after the first 10 seconds, I realized this was going to be an incredibly uncomfortable conversation and nothing was going to come out of it. And I was just making them feel worse. And so I got out of it as gracefully as I could. And now I'm really not sure if I should have told that story. Let me go back to the industry side. Having spent a lot of time there, just one of the misconceptions that I've seen is that from the industry is that it is all about the money, and that is, like a lot of these things, that is and isn't a misconception. I mean, at some point, yes, it's all about the money. I've run 3 companies. When you're running a small company, at some point, it's all about the money. It has to be, because I have 20 people and their families and their kids who, if I say it's not about the money, suddenly don't eat or make their mortgage payments. And that kind of thing can weigh on you very, very heavily. That said, there are also times when I've been in a game company, actually I was interviewing in a place, and as I was interviewing in this room, I was waiting for the next interview to come in, the door is open, this woman walks by, I've got to know her later, wonderful young woman, but she goes by going, "Make more money!" This was in a free-to-play company, and at that level, they were really all about the money. So it's not, it is a misconception that there is a lot of artistry that people try and put into things, but it's not entirely a misconception because the money is, at the very least, a necessity and often a goal in itself. I guess one way is the thing I wanted to move to next, and just lastly, if we can, is what are some things we can do? What are some things that either we're doing now from Jess or James? Do we have any best practices? And what are things that we can do in the future? One of the things I'll throw out is take some of that money and bring it over to academia. This is something that we all have the computers we have today because the federal government and large companies have invested in scholarship that has driven chip design forward. Now, it turns out there's a couple problems with the chips, but chip design, memory design, a whole bunch of things, flat screens, all these things came out of research dollars, which we have almost none of in games today. I think about the kinds of things we could do with virtual worlds, given the technology we have, if we had access to money that wasn't committed for next quarter. And again, that's the flip side. The problem is in the games industry, they don't want to let go of any of that money because they may need it next quarter. Excuse me. But so I guess I'd like to get from you guys, what do you think, what are some things we can do looking forward? And if there are any things that we're doing now that work well, what are they? And then we'll open up to the audience.
So on my side, I think that the easiest thing to do is actually organize a conference that is really an industry academic conference. I know that it's been talked about a couple of times.
There's the FDG, the Foundations of Digital Games, which is sort of kind of that.
And I wanted, yes, but more so.
Yeah. Yes, but more. Right?
Yes. You know exactly, yeah. And then on the other side, our industry has tried to avoid, to its detriment, interacting with government at all. I think that even if we're not willing to put up industry dollars, there are government grants for almost everything. There's starting to be grants for game stuff, but even those grants are often directed by the wrong people, which includes myself at times. But I think that if we were willing to work with the government a little bit more to say, hey, this is a major American cultural export, all that sort of thing, we could get more grants. That would mean that it wouldn't be a burden on the industry, but we could still employ academics.
The great thing I think about that is that it would also allow us to have a greater flowering, if you will, of more indies and small groups, which is where a lot of the innovation happens. One of the things that I often talk about in talking about innovation with students is that innovation equals risk. Anytime you're going to try to do something that's new, it's going to be risky. If it's risky, it's risky in terms of dollars. That's why they need the dollars next quarter, because if they're trying to do anything risky at all. So it's a difficult cycle, which needs to be, I think, could be helped greatly by having more research dollars coming in from outside, so we can try some new things. Jess, what about you? I'll give you the last word on this, and we'll go to the audience.
Sure. So I can't really speak from the industry side, but from the academic side, something that I've taken the initiative to do is to know more about the game development process. I'm kind of from a somewhat unique position because although I'm getting my PhD in communication science, my master's degree is in media arts, where I first actually focused on video game design. So I have some working knowledge of game design, working with certain game development tools. And to this day, I continue to talk to folks like Mike and Ted Castronova, who is also at Indiana University. And I also, as a PhD student, even though my focus is games research, I make an effort to talk to the students who are in the game development courses, be involved in the local game development community to a certain extent. And so I continue to try to be knowledgeable about game development, also game developers themselves, the people who are working on the games. And I think if more people studying games from a strictly academic perspective made the choice to do that, there would be probably a little more nuance to some of the research being done in games, or perhaps a more optimistic perspective of game developers or game designers done on the research. And I do come from a somewhat privileged position because IU has the media school where we have a game design program. So we have faculty teaching game design courses, and not all universities have that kind of resource, but there are in most states something of a local game development community. It's spreading across the country. It's getting increasingly more popular for game design communities to pop up almost everywhere. So I think that's something that academics in particular can take advantage of and try to be involved in to a certain extent. And just talking to game developers at more events like this, I think really helps bridge the gap for sure.
Great. I think it's a great note to, not to end on exactly, but to move to the audience, because I want to thank everyone who's here for being here, because you are part of bridging this gap. So I know we've had a few hands go up. Boy, a whole bunch of them now. Let me go to this gentleman here in the front.
Because I have to go, so I'll say this standing up. When you talk about getting the government involved with both academic and industry, the first thing I think of is how my father managed to bypass both in his own industry. He's not in the game industry, although he does like Zelda and Game of Thrones respectively. He read Tolkien before I was born. He actually had a very hard time getting into any type of career. Like, he had no academic standing. He just got out of the military, and on top of all that, he really didn't know anybody in any business. And what really helped him break through, both educationally and into his own industry, which is mold making, which is, I guess, kind of like 3D modeling, was the apprenticeship program that he had, which I think was from Lyndon B. Johnson at the time. He became an apprentice craftsman and learned the craft of mold making, and now he practically runs the place. He's like a top chief director, and he goes all the way from India to China negotiating business deals. And if we can get past video games being either a product for some big corporation that worships the almighty dollar, or some academic subject to academics who think it's the root of all evil, and maybe focus it more on a craft that simply needs money to both feed its artists like Da Vinci, who had his own apprenticeship program, or just put into the project itself, because let's face it, video games are expensive to make, even though we have more free software than ever before. I think that would be a great solution to that problem. Do you think the same thing, or am I off base?
So let me just sort of repeat that. Unfortunately, I don't know if we have a mic in the room, but for the stream, I think that the point of the question here is about apprenticeships in game design, which I think is an excellent point to make. It does sit at the connection point in a lot of ways between academia and industry. I think apprenticeships, or internships as we often call them, are incredibly valuable. I look at this, I guess, a little bit more like if you think about a medical student who is not yet a physician, but is actually going and treating people. That's kind of an apprenticeship. It's a very high-end apprenticeship. That's the kind of thing that I look for, and I've employed people like that in the past. What we do in our program at IU is every one of our students who graduates having made a game, having made a company. They actually make an LLC. They have a published game by the time they're out, as a way of forcing that kind of apprenticeship where they're apprenticing to us, I guess, as the faculty, but then they're also expected to mentor other people who are coming up after them. So this idea of apprenticing to someone else and mentoring someone else and building that chain, I think, is a really, really important one. It's not entirely clear to me how we do that more effectively in the industry. Maybe you guys have James in particular, have some thoughts on this. But it's because the problem with interns, I'm going to say this, is that they're often useless unless they've been well trained in what kinds of things to do. I mean, just an easy example, we use Slack for all of our student communication because that's currently the industry standard. When Slack stops going, when people start using Discord more than Slack, move to Discord. There are more tools available, there are more processes and things that you can learn on your own. I think the best thing is for a student to learn those things and then go intern or apprentice someplace. That's a fantastic thing to do and does help bridge that gap. James, thoughts?
I would love to give mine, but I saw like a dozen hands, and I know we have very little time, so.
Okay, let me move on. Yes, in here in the front.
Hi.
Thank you.
I guess I come more from the academic side of things. I actually, one thing that I struggle with is that coming from that side of things, I know that like all of this information, all that research is just inaccessible to a multitude of people. And part of the reason that I moved into games and game design is because I believe that language is more accessible. But all of sorry. I was wondering about how you
Don't worry about it, you're doing great.
You're fine.
I'm so sorry. I had this prepared.
No, it's totally fine. Take your time.
Right. More and more, all the outreach I do is based in open source, and like all of these resources are kind of placed further outside of the realm of academia, and it's all driven by this anxiety that these academic discussions really need restructuring. I was wondering how you micro degrees, things forward happening, and do you feel like programs like that are helping towards that, or do you feel like and helping to restructure, or do you feel like that's displacing the conversations else and having it be more towards one side? If that makes sense.
I think so. So just micro degrees and some of the different educational opportunities that are available beyond sort of traditional academia. James, you get a minute, and then I'll give it a couple seconds.
Oh no, give the definition of microdegrees. And
Well, so there's a lot of things. They're from everything from Khan Academy to Pluralsight, Udemy. I'm taking 4 Udemy courses right now myself, so that tells you my opinion. They're extremely well done. I don't believe they're a full substitute for a strong education. But I think that, I don't know if you guys have heard of this series called Extra Credits. Have you noticed?
it's terrible.
You can learn more in one of those 5-minute videos than in one of my hour-long lectures. I hate to say.
But I would say there isn't, to me, on the other side, I don't know about training academics to be able to interact with the games industry, but in terms of training young designers, people who have just gotten out of high school, to get somebody from the point where they've just left high school to being ready to do design in the industry, I'm even not sure that 4 years is enough, to be totally honest with you. So
We pack a lot into 4 years and get complaints because when we start off with our degrees, we're saying this is going to be engineering hard or pre-med hard, and our students are starting to believe us because we've packed so much in.
when I was teaching it, my courses had a 60% failure rate because that was how difficult it had to be, because I would refuse to graduate anyone or pass anyone who I didn't think could actually go on and be in the industry, right? Like, you're not doing anybody a service to hand somebody a worthless piece of paper and charge them $100,000 for it. So, I mean, I totally agree with your mode.
And now we're starting to edge over into our next panel, which is the future of future of game design education. But the micro degrees or online courses is a really interesting, phenomenal area. It's a really important area. I don't think it's a substitute overall, but I think it's really important nonetheless. Let me go to this woman here. Yeah.
So I can keep this relatively short. So I work in policy. I do like copyright and telecom, all that kind of stuff. And I do a lot with fandoms and with video games. And so I actually just had an experience where I had to file comments in the US Copyright Office explaining that the line between single player and multiplayer games is not as clear cut as you think that it is. So I guess, like, coming from a policy perspective, we see a lot of misinformation or lack of information, and the information that does come up tends to be about gaming as an industry, so from like ESA and trade associations. What do you think are good ways for engaging policymakers to avoid these situations where you either have to explain to them from square one exactly what like a server check is, or avoid this kind of moral panic that we often see with trolling in video games and sort of.
So I think that the Office of Science and Technology Policy plus, have you seen Tech Congress? So basically, I think at the bureaucratic government level, I have no idea. At the legislative government level, we have this problem of having removed the budget for any scientific advisors at all from both the Congress and Senate. And there's a group called Tech Congress that actually just self-funded a individual to advise Congress on technology issues because, that would be useful when you're legislating the internet. I think we need to do more of that. We need to have more people who can even have a conversation, because I would love not to have to explain everything from what a server is, but I would love the opportunity to explain what a server is before someone legislates on things that involve my servers, right? So I think the first thing is just making sure that we sort of demand scientific advisors back in our legislative bodies.
I do think there's an on-the-ground, just to say what we're talking about in case it didn't get picked up. We're talking about making policy. How do we make effectively engage policymakers and people from industry or academia? I do think academics can be a good middle ground there. I've done some advising along those lines. I think that, but it's really sort of very ad hoc and just here and there a little bit. There are some good efforts. The White House, last administration had.
That's the Office of Science and Technology Policy. They had a senior advisor on digital media, which actually it's a long story. I won't say anything that I shouldn't say, but yeah, I was going to be involved in that, and then certain things happened and that post disappeared.
administrations change. But I do think that there's a lot of levels from legislative, some of the, even in the executive branch, where we can engage. We just need to engage. I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah.
So we've got time for, I think, one or two more. I'll stay until they kick us out. But let me go in the back here, the gentleman with the, yes, you, thank you.
So I come from a museum background. Yesterday about games in museums. And museums are typically considered game design. Where should we go for trying to put new shoes on in the industry?
We seem to be a little bit underwater here in our audio. I'm not sure if that's me or you, Jess. We're getting some audio gurgling sounds.
I'm not saying anything. I'm sorry.
And I'm sorry, I missed just the last part. You're coming from a museum background, which is definitely more on the academic side. And so just relate the last part of your question again.
So, how should we give academics game design and vice versa? How do we get people in the industry how to learn?
So yeah, how do we get people in on the museum side? How do we get them the knowledge they need to design games? Is one way to say, is that roughly? I think like anything, I think this is the kind of thing that's happened before. 20 years ago or so, the Smithsonian was really interested in doing some better displays. And so they engaged some human-computer interaction people and made some much better, much more interactive displays. Of course, they're working with the constraints they have, the budgetary and time constraints they have. I've actually done, I did a game for, or consulted on a game for a living history museum in Indiana, which was a ton of fun. I think really it's more just, again, like we've heard, I think a number of times, it's about having that contact. You have to know there's a need there. And the people who are in the industry or in academia, and I think maybe this may be a better fit for academia, have to have the knowledge and the ability to reach out as well. And to say, hey, if this is something that you need, this is something we can do. That I think is going to be as much built on contacts. I mean, I'm glad you're here. Again, there's the saying that the most progress in science happens at funerals because the old guys have to die off sometimes. I think a lot of progress in these kinds of cross-disciplinary areas is made at conferences like this one, and not just the academic, not just the industry conferences, but community conferences like this one. So I think that's terrific. Jess, I don't know, or James, do you have any thoughts on this?
I do actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, you go first.
Was he asking about how someone in a museum can get into game design or learn about game design? Is that the question?
From how do we help people who are running museums or similar non-industry academic institutions, but who want to make something that's public facing? How do we help them do what they want to do better?
I think you had some really great points, Mike. I would probably add, like on a personal level, if someone working for a museum or a nonprofit wants to learn about game design, you could attend a local game jam. So I think there's even game jams taking place at MAGFest, for instance. So even if you have no technical skills and just want to work on a paper prototype or a board game and learn about game design principles, that could potentially enhance whatever kind of display or knowledge you're trying to pass on. You can pick up some skills from experienced developers, designers at game jam events.
And then I would just add to that the school I went to, the Entertainment Technology Center, would actually contract with museums. So museums would come to the school and say, you have a design program, you've got a reputable game design program. We will contract you guys to build this display. We will work directly with academic advisors plus the students to create the games that we need. And that would get a lot of the communication back and forth. It wasn't just like hiring students, because you did have the expertise of sort of the academic advisors who had really been in the industry and really knew how to build these things. And then the other side is, I know a lot of sort of indie studios that are always looking for a project that doesn't feel terrible to do and yet will bring in a few dollars. And so look up your local indies.
Both those are really great suggestions. I'll also throw out a plug for a thing called Protospiel. For those of you who are interested in tabletop gaming, just look it up online. They're not quite unconferences, but they're very small gatherings they're phenomenal gatherings of people who are making tabletop games, prototyping them. If you are interested in saying, hey, how can I find some good game designers? I'm kind of interested in this idea, and I want to see if it actually works. Look up a Protospiel. There's no doubt one near you. I think we have time for maybe one more question. We're actually over time, but I'll take one more here. Yes, please go ahead.
So I used to be the president of my game development club at one of the community colleges, and when I was there, what I was trying to do was interface the club and some video game design companies to try to help develop a future pipeline for students into the industry. And I didn't really have a lot of success with that, and I'm trying to set up something similar at JMU now as the goal for me personally moving forward. And I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts with regard to how to get that kind of contact going, like what that would require.
Yeah, I can tell you the very first thing it would require. So the question was about how do you build a pipeline from a local game club or community college into some of the game companies that may be in your area or maybe not in your area. The number one thing, it's going to be the very first question that will get you in the door or not, is what games have you made? And it really doesn't matter how small they are or how ugly they are. If there's like someone can look and say, oh, that's a game, and that really feels like a game, that's what will get you in the door. And if you can build up a reputation of saying, hey, look, we've had 3 people come from this club that have all made small, interesting little games. That's how you get the sort of momentum going. Absent that, it's just not going to happen. I mean, again, going back to the industry side of things, there's too much going on. The pressure's too high. The risks are too high for me to stop and say, as much as I would like to, if I'm a general manager or a CEO someplace, to say, oh, let me talk to this person. I may talk to you, but let me bring some of these people in. I think there's still a lot of value, a ton of value in a rigorous undergraduate or graduate education in game design, but not everyone's going to have that. The thing that is the academic gods will strike me with lightning for saying this, but if I have to choose between someone who's made an interesting non-clone game and someone with a degree, I will choose the game every single time. And I say this as a professor. This also, I tell my students this a lot too. So that's the thing, and that will teach them so much of what they need to know just going through that process that they'll be different coming out on the other side of it, no question. Jess, let me go to you if you have a comment on that real quick, and then I'll give James the last word.
Yeah, I don't have too much working in the student clubs and integrating it into industry, so feel free to let James chime in.
So all I would say is, one, whether it's IGDA events or whatever, a lot of cities will have some game developer gatherings. Make sure that you go to that and some of your club goes to that, because there's nothing like meeting people face to face. And then second, I mean, Mike's right, like there is no substitute for making a game. Everyone should go through that process. Once you've gone through that process, especially if you have anything, even if you don't think it's good, but especially if you have anything that you think is good, submit it to all the competitions, because one of the things that will separate out people's resumes is, oh, it was an IGF selection or like an official PAX 10 selection. Okay, cool, I'm going to take a second look at this person, right? Even if they don't have the 3 years of experience that we say we need for this position. So I would say, and as was said, once you start getting a couple of people, you'll get a reputation in your local area, and then it'll become much easier. But as far as the last word goes, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming at 11:30 to a discussion of how to get academia and the games industry to talk. It's amazing that you're all here, so thank you guys so much.
Yes, thank you very much for coming.